Hello everyone, this is Marilyn. Welcome back to KK's Quilt Studio. We're going to talk today about creating applique. Someone posted in one of the social media groups a picture of this bow, which is in the upper center portion of your screen. She created this bow with a continuous line drawing. So it's kind of like if you had a pencil and a piece of paper, you'd keep drawing this bow without ever lifting your pencil up off the paper. And that's kind of how we work when we work on the quilting side. We want something that is going to create one continuous stitched line, which creates a quilting design. But we're going to be working on the other side of the house, the other side of Art and Stitch. If you own Art and Stitch, you'll know that Art and Stitch has features for embroidery and quilting. So we'll digitize both types of files for both machines, your long arm as well as your embroidery machine. So when Karen posted about how to create this design as an applique, I tried to explain to her that she needed to divide that bow apart and work with it as layers or portions, elements of that design. So if for those of you who are not real familiar with doing machine applique, let's look at the steps that are involved. An embroidery machine, you place a piece of fabric in your hoop and push go. The very first step, it's going to stitch out an outline and then stop or pause. And we're, as you see, we're sewing a pair. So it is stitching out the outline of where we need to place fabric. We need to cover that entire outline. So we need a piece of fabric that is larger than our outline pair. Step 2, we cover that outline with fabric and push go again on our machine, and it does the what we call tack down stitches. So you'll see there is another identical shape or row of stitches that stitch down that fabric. And then we're going to take a pair of scissors. If you need to remove your hoop from the machine, do it carefully and stitch or cut as close as you can to the edge of that fabric. So all the way around, and trim away that fabric so you have something that looks like the third picture here. That's all we want to remain of that fabric. So remove this from the hoop. So place this fabric that's been tacked down back into your machine and push the go button again. So next thing that's going to happen is your machine is going to create this satin stitch all the way around. And then if there are any elements like the leaf and the stem of this pair, it will add them as well. Now looking at the design file, you may see that these are all different colors. So this might be a blue, the tack down stitch might be orange, and then the final stitch is yellow. Doesn't matter. You'll see that I used the same color all the way through here until I got to here, and then when I got to my leaf, which I need to change colors, I did. So the color changes in your embroidery design on your screen is only there to tell the machine to stop, to pause, so that you can place your fabric, so that you can take the hoop out and cut away your fabric and then put it back in and do your final stitch out. Let's go into Art and Stitch and see how a basic applique design is created. So I'm just going to take a basic shape. I'm going to draw a circle, any ellipse. Doesn't matter. This is just for demonstration purposes. So I have my piece of artwork, and then here is that applique button. So regardless of what your shape is, you can just click, and one step you have your applique design. Let me turn off the 3D and let's grab our magnifying glass and take a closer look at that embroidery. I'm going to go over here to the sequence view and expand those, and you'll see that the applique is 3 different colors. It's comprised of that blue line, which is right here. The blue line is that placement stitch. The pink is your tack down. And then finally the green is the satin stitch. If you were to select this item and go over into properties, you can change the type of final stitch. That satin stitch can also be a blanket or a motif stitch. You can change the placement of that placement line. You can change the width of your satin stitch, but one click of the button does the default. If you want to change it in any way, that is how you create an applique simply and easily in Art and Stitch. Okay, so if I were to hit the space bar, back out on this, you would see there is our basic design. I filled it with fabric. You can fill it with any fabric that's on your computer. It gives you a preview of the design that you are going to be stitching out. That is how you do applique in Art and Stitch. Now I should have mentioned anytime that you're creating anything for machine embroidery, you want to make sure you are in the machine embroidery side, the style. You want to make sure that the program knows what you're creating is for machine embroidery. Why? What's the difference? When you are in quilting, it doesn't do the tie-offs and tie-ons that you need the instructions for your embroidery machine. And you know, on your long arm, you set the tie-offs, if you're doing tie-offs, at your machine. So that is one big basic difference between selecting embroidery or quilting. So in order to make sure you're there, go under the Tools tab, down to Preferences, and make sure that you tell the software what kind of design that you're creating, a quilting or embroidery. And embroidery, then you'll select your machine format. And I'm using PES because that is the format for my machine. And I'm just going to click cancel because we are already in the embroidery format. All right, back to today's design. Like I said, I didn't have the design file, so I took a snip of the picture that she posted and brought it in with my backdrop tool. And then I began to trace around it and break it into parts. So this basically is what I began to do. A little more talking with Karen. She wants to actually do 2 fabrics, so it's not going to be 1 fabric. So there is another reason why we need to break this design apart. Can't just be one continuous design and get a applique that has any kind of features to it. Like this is one side of the ribbon, the green, and then this appearance, it looks like the inside or back side of the ribbon. Here the ribbon flips over, the tails twist. So this portion, the twisted tails and the inside are going to be one color. So that's the back side of the ribbon. And then this, the loops on the bow and the tails are going to be the front side of the ribbon. So if I were to go in here and turn on the fill, you can kind of see how the ribbon, the different colors are going to show. So this basically, the next slide shows you the portions that I broke out. And basically we're going to do this is the back side of the ribbon, the yellow, and then this one and the darker gold are all going to be one, but I colored it because we're going to be, I'm going to be showing you the steps. So essentially the loops of the bow and the legs here, the drops of the ribbon, can be all one color. And then the flip side of the ribbon that's shown can be another color. So if I go back here to this slide, go over to sequence view, if I turn off and hide just by clicking the eye, you'll see that this is going to be one, her ribbon is going to be red. So this is going to be a darker shade of red. And then the loops and the legs are going to be another shade of red. So actually I could, if I selected this portion of the design, if you have an electronic cutting machine, and not many people know about this, rather than having to cut out my fabric, I could go to export artwork and save this either as an SVG, a vector file, or as an FCM, Frank funny cutting machine. I guess that's fine cutting machine. That FCM is the native format for Brother scan and cut machines. If you have another other electronic cutting machines, save them as a DXF or a SVG file. And then when you're placing your fabric over, you don't need to do that extra step to cut the fabric out here. You'll already have a cut piece of fabric and you just place that over your outline and then do your tack down stitches. Okay? So that is one extra thing you can do with applique if you have an electronic cutting machine of sorts. So I will unhide those, and so we're creating essentially, if I go to this picture, we're creating one portion of the design for the flips of the ribbon, the back side of the ribbon, up here, the back side of the bow, the loops, the tails, and then the knot. But we only need two pieces, two colorations of fabric. But in order to get this to sew out a knot, sew out tails, we need to break it out, break it into this many elements. So essentially there's just what, 3 elements: the flip side of the ribbon, the front side of the ribbon, and the knot. So just 3. Okay, let's get to creating our ribbon. Let's hide this portion again. So when I went to draw this ribbon. What I did was I drew portions of this ribbon. This one I did a little bit of an overlap because I want the fabric for the flip side of the ribbon. If you've done regular applique, you know you want to tuck that up underneath. So this one will be on top, this one will be underneath. So I want to tuck that fabric up underneath of that. And the same with the legs of the ribbon, the drops, the tails. I want them to tuck up underneath that bow. So the bow, the loops, will go on top. Likewise, the back side of the ribbons will be underneath. And I have gone from, let's turn these off. When I drew this, there, I actually created 4 pieces because I'll need 4 pieces of fabric. But when I'm going to do my placement stitch, I joined these 2. So what I actually did was I can divide them up, split lines, but it's easier to create a small box, just overlapping. Select all 3 portions, and I'm going to right click, transform, and unite. So this gives me this part of the design. Let me hide things again. So when I do my placement stitches, I can simply do one continuous stitch. And that was part of her question, was if I have to divide everything up, I'm going to have lots of trims and jumps, and that just makes it longer. Yes, it does. But we can connect these 2 because they are close. Okay, so instead of 4 pieces, I have 3. One other thing I could do is I can create stitches in between. So here is my inside of the loops that I created. I turn on the shape stitches. There's my start and stopping point. The next line starts here, runs down. This is just a straight stitch, stops here. This one, the start and stop is here, so it's going to sew around and back up. And this one starts here, goes up and around, and then stitches here and around. So as long as these are one color, my machine will continuously stitch. If they were different colors, my machine would stop and tie off. I don't need to connect them as long as the start and stop points are right on top of each other. Your machine, mine does, should stitch all the way down and around, and will stitch this group of stitches, of placement stitch or tack down stitches. It should stitch it all in one run. If I turn this back on, you'll say, but my stitches will show. No, they will not show, because if I apply a fill, when I place my fabric, my second fabric on top, I'm not going to see those stitches. So it hides those runs. You turn that off and peek underneath. It hides them under the fabric. So good digitizing is when you can connect up something like this, like Karen asked about and requested. That's how you do it. So you create separate runs to connect your elements. Okay? The next part of the design, I'm going to, this is where we've done the placement. We've put our fabric on. We've done our tack down. Everything's in place. Now we need to start assigning our satin stitches, or satin or blanket, whichever one you're using. I'm using a satin for this example. But like I said, this portion of the design is going to be tucked up under here. So if I were to select all of that and apply a satin stitch, you'll see I have satin stitches here underneath this overlay, and I don't want that because those can be bulky and bumpy. So let's undo that, and let me grab our zoom tool, zoom in down here, and take a look what I've done. I have split this design, so I no longer need this line. I can hit the delete key on my keyboard or just cut. I don't need this line as well. Okay, all I need is this, and that is what I'm going to apply my satin stitches to. Okay, so how did I do that? I'll do that on this one. I went to the line where that intersects, and I right click and split the line. So now I can take that piece of artwork and cut it away. Okay, take this line and I'll just move that point so that lays, and this will be a satin stitch as well. So if I were to apply a satin stitch to the drops of the ribbon, now you'll see that it just barely overlaps and hides that ribbon. And you can just ignore this warning, that's okay. So always remember, sequential view, sequence view, that what you want to go on top, the top layer goes on the bottom. This all goes underneath the brown portion of that design. Likewise up here, we were to apply a satin stitch. Let's hide this one because we are going to have, remember, if I apply a satin stitch and then apply a satin stitch to that, I'm going to have 2 layers of satin stitch. So on this portion of that design, I need to remove that portion of the design underneath as well. And I've already broken that apart. So hide this. This is the part. This is the only one that I want satin stitches applied to. This bottom half, I'm going to cut and do the same here. Split the line. So the only satin that you'll want, your fabric will be there, but only the satin, the top edge, is what you want to finish. Okay, so we're putting this design together, let's take a final look at where we're going. I'm going to hide, not lock, hide, just by clicking on the little eyeball, and we'll walk through step by step. This is what your design file is going to be looking like. If I want to hit the plus sign and do the expansion. Now, this is my placement line. So I have my loop, and I went ahead and connect these even though it's my placement. So I'll know to tuck my fabric up here in the corners. It's not going to have this connecting part. And I'm going to have the flip side, the darker reds, which is what Karen's going to be doing for the flip side of her ribbon. So this is your placement stitch. Next will be the tack down. So that will hold down the fabric once we've placed it on top of our placement stitches. Okay. And we're advancing. This is our tack down for those parts of the design, and this one I've divided it. I'm going to move it. If you need to move a portion of your design, simply just drop it down. Actually, this one can stay where it was. We'll just undo, because it's the first part of this design. I'm going to move it up to there. Okay, so this will stitch out all the way around. You'll notice that I changed these to placement, tack down, and satin stitches. So if you ever want to change, normally this will appear as artwork. If you double click, let me click off. Double click on this, you can type in placement, and that's what I did here. Just to show, doesn't make any final changes to your design, it's just for your notation. So I'll assign a running stitch to the placement. I'll assign a running stitch to the tack down, and I'll assign a satin stitch, and I'll need to divide that up like I did back here. I didn't do that on this one. Okay. So we'll hide this and close this, close this. Now we've got the first part of our design set down. The next portion we want to work on is the red bow. So this will be my placement stitch. So I will add a running stitch to it, select it, and add a running stitch. Place my fabric. The next stitch, different color. See, I want my machine to stitch the placement line, pause, let me set down the fabric, do the tack down. If I want to make this a zigzag, you can do that as well. So I like to use actually running stitches for both. Then we're going to do the first part of our design, and let me change this color. You can see it a little bit better. That is going to be the tails. Remember how I said we want those tails, the stitching tucked up under that bow? There is no connection here because this part, the left tail, the loops, the right tail are all one piece of fabric. So I don't have any stitches to go across here. So I want to do a satin starting up here and running down. Okay, that runs over top of these reverse flips. And then the final satin stitch. And if you want to connect these up, I separated out this piece. If we go back, you'll remember that this bow was one piece. I broke it apart. I broke it here and here, here and here. So I created 4 pieces, which will be the left side. I assigned a run to this portion. Let's see, is that top or bottom? And then a run and final. So it's going to stitch the left side of the loop across the top, the right side of the loop, and across the bottom. Why did I change it to a run stitch? Because I don't want a satin stitch under that knot. I'll turn on my knot. There is my final stitch, because I want to go across the lower and the upper portions with another satin stitch. I don't want stitches on top of stitches. So that is how my design works. And remember, because I have all the same color, my machine is not going to stop. It's not going to stitch this part, tie off, tie on to do this part, tie off, tie on to do this part. It's going to do it in one continuous run. So while it looks funky on the screen, know that these are the steps and the layers that we need to create a layered design. So you're going to use 2 pieces of fabric, but then several layers of different stitches. So I need to stitch out the very bottom of the design, which is going to be the flip side of the label. And then I'm going to move to the drops of the ribbon. Okay. And then I'm going to move to the loops of the bow. And then finally, just an outline to symbolize the knot. So all of these 3 colors, the pink, the green, and the blue, will be stitching in the same color on top of your second color of red. So like I said, this is really a complex design. It is not a simple one and done like this, where we are stitching the placement, putting the fabric down, stitching our tack down stitches, and then doing our final embroidery. It's not quite as simple as that, but I hope I have explained it step by step. If you have any questions, please drop comments, questions down in the comments below this video. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. I appreciate your feedback, and lets me know that you like more videos like this, where I explain step by step how to do some more complex work in art and stitch, where most designs created in embroidery are pretty basic, pretty easy. You might add some extra embroidery on there, fill stitches. This is a typical embroidery, but applique it's special. It just needs a little bit more of a thought process but step by step, I know that you can break it out and create things. Just remember it's layers. The placement stitch, layer on your fabric, layer on your tack down, layer on your embroidery. So one on top of the other. I know you've got it. I hope you understand. Till we meet next time, I wish you happy sewing.